Good morning. Good morning, Anuj. Good morning, Dr. Nayan. Welcome
Good morning
to this session. And we really look forward to an exciting session today. Before I start, I'd like to welcome all the audience. The people are joining in still. And for those of you who have already joined in, welcome to this session on impact investments. Let me quickly share screen and to give you an idea of what we do at the WE program. Just one slide. I'm not really going to take too long on this. The WE program is mainly a community-based leadership and entrepreneurship building program for women. And here we started off with a goal where we want to build a self-sustaining community of women leaders and entrepreneurs. Eventually, the target for this would be women at IIT Bombay and beyond. By women at IIT Bombay, we mean the entire community, students, staff, faculty, family members, and so on. And obviously women from across India. We have members from across India on our WhatsApp group, which is a very active group where they exchange ideas and information and so on and so forth. Several activities that we conduct at under this umbrella: panel discussions, fireside chats. Today we have a fireside chat as you all are here for. Design thinking workshops. We want to idea generation workshops on finance, legal issues, marketing, etc. And fundamentally, we're facilitating information and reach network. Right. In addition, there is an ongoing mentoring program where people take appointments, sign up, and then we facilitate these meetings with the right types of speakers or the right type of advisors who could mentor the ladies, the entrepreneurs, based on the requirements. So that's a mentoring program. So far, we can say we've reached over 350 individual people, individual entrepreneurs. Over 50% plus, they continue to engage with us, meaning more than we have the WhatsApp group itself has about 180 members. And this engagement has been continuing since 2019, which is very encouraging. And this community of innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders, we would like to now take this to the next level. And we're working on certain programs which we hope will look at greater impact, greater reach, and growth for the women entrepreneurs. So that's about the program for you. And thank you for joining. I'll stop sharing. The session today is special. It is about funding for impact-based startups, and our moderators and our speakers. We have really illustrious speakers today. Dr. Nayan Mitra, who's going to be the moderator of the session. She is an international authority on the subject of sustainability, CSR, and corporate governance. Her company is Sustainable Advancements, OPC Private Limited. It's a woman-led company, and it broadly aims to promote the sustainable development goals through advocacy and implementation. Under her leadership, we see Sustainable Advancements has established itself as a holistic institution of international and national repute in the area of sustainability and corporate social responsibility, coaching, consultancy, research. Sustainable Advancements specializes on conducting international and national researches on various topics of sustainability that include, but do not limit to, researching the first ever comprehensive Women at Work study in partnership with Aspire for Her Foundation. Topics on supply chain sustainability and so on, several more topics. Dr. Nayan feels deeply for women's issues, and she is the founding president of the Women's Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, West Bengal Sustainable Business Council. She's a mentor at the Aspire for Her Foundation. She's an influencer at the Women Novator, where she continuously strives to bring in innovative programs to contribute to the impact of SDG 5. She is a pro bono member of the Advisory Council and board of some of the eminent NGOs in India, whose work with women and children has received global recognition. She's the series editor of Responsible Business and Sustainable Management by Springer, whose first two books on diversity and inclusion and emerging economic models. Dr. Mitra is the editor of the books Corporate Social Responsibility in India, Cases and Development After the Legal Mandate in India, 2017. Mandated Corporate Social Responsibility, Evidence from India, 2019, and Corporate Social Responsibility in Rising Economies, Fundamentals, Approaches, and Case Studies, 2020, with co-editor Dr. Rien Schmidt-Peter from Germany. This book has been published by Springer International, Switzerland. Dr. Mitra has published over 40 peer-reviewed research publications in international journals and books, and is Academic Council member and Science Board member in international academic forums. Recently, she edited the special issue, Business and Benevolence, of the Journal of Human Values by the Indian Institute of Management, Kolkata, along with Fulbright scholar Dr. Diony Moody, Assistant Professor of South Asian Religions at the University of Oklahoma, USA. She's often invited by think tanks like the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, Niti Aayog, to conduct trainings and provide advisory. She spearheads the India CSR Leadership Interview Series by India CSR, where she brings together the collective thoughts, ideas, and practices of distinguished corporate leaders on sustainability and CSR. Dr. Mitra is the recipient of the prestigious Author Award at the Indian CSR Leadership Summit 3 years in a row, 2017, 2018, and 19. Adjudged as one of the most impactful CSR leaders in India 2019, and many other international awards for her contribution to CSR, and recognized as an exceptional woman of excellence at the Women Economic Forum 2019, New Delhi, India. So Dr. Nayan, most welcome to you, and thank you for agreeing, and thank you for being here today as the moderator for this session. The speaker for our session is Anuj Sharma. He is the founder CEO of Alcizar Impact. By qualification, Anuj is BSc, FCA, MFM, CRMA, Harvard. And as I said before, founder and CEO, Alcizar Impact. His professional experience of 2 decades in international structuring, impact investing, transaction advisory, blended finance, and legal strategy. Anuj is a well-known name in impact investing and social enterprise landscape worldwide. He has worked in 15 countries globally: US, UK, Netherlands, China, Mongolia, UAE, India, Myanmar, Nepal, Bangladesh. Phew, that's something. In 2008, Anuj founded ASCO, which is now restructured as a legal entity, Alcizar Impact, India's only fully focused transaction advisory and structuring firm in impact investing and social enterprise landscape, after working for mainstream clients across the globe from the year 2001 to 2008. Alcizar Impact works at the intersection of advisory, investing, advocacy, and incubation to further capital flow for social sector in South Asia. In a decade, Alcizar Impact has mobilized $750 million in the development space, development impact space. Alcizar Impact does a focused incubation for the marginalized communities, gender, and difficult geographies where there has been no investment in startups. It has a portfolio of 15 high potential social enterprises, including but not limited to Srinagar, Nagaland, Ladakh, Uttarakhand, Jharkhand, Sikkim, etc. Anuj, the director in select social entities, including remote sensing technology, startup focused on agriculture and forestry, an electric mobility startup, deep tech startup focused on environment and sustainability, etc. He is an angel investor in select social startups. He is visiting faculty in TIS, Center of Social Entrepreneurship. He is mentor and judge at Venture Cup, Denmark, Mass Challenge, Boston, and Texas. Passion for Good, Netherlands, Naropa Fellowship, Hemis, Leh, India, IIT Bombay, IIT Kanpur, IIT Mandi, etc. Anuj has taken several workshops for impact investors, social enterprises, and was a speaker at varied conferences across the world. And there's a long list of conferences, starting with this going on up to, across the speaker at the Mobility Money World Asia conference in 2010, Singapore. So there is a range, kind of, I'll call short if I continue to read that. But yes, I'm delighted to have Anuj and Dr. Nayan here with us. And this is a topic which is very close to many people's heart. I must say, Dr. Anuj, I must say that Anuj is passionate about enterprise development, and he is willing to work with our members on building their organizations towards enterprises. So yes, most welcome to Anuj, Dr. Nayan. Yes, Professor Anu has joined. Welcome, Professor Anu. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for all the introductions. Before, we don't want to waste any more time, learning about each other now. Let's just, a warm welcome to all of you. Let's get directly to the questions because we are anticipating quite a number of questions coming from the audience. So Anuj, what is impact investing? Because, we'll start from the very basic. So what is impact investing?
Yeah, thanks a lot. So like we all have seen investing in a very specific manner of profits. Like we invest and we make profits out of the return that we are trying to have. In impact investing is slightly wider, where you have investing at an intersection of profit, purpose, and also social well-being. If you bring all these things together, this is what something after COVID everybody has understood far more, and that is what has been there in the, like I will say, in different kind of pockets across the globe for the past 2 decades now. But thanks to COVID, now it has become the mainstream. Everybody's talking about it, and now this is the same thing we will be discussing as well as before.
Yeah, thank you so much. Because we keep about B Corps and so on and so forth, but the concept in India has still not caught up. It's there, but we don't talk about impact organizations. We talk about social enterprises. So when we talk about social enterprises in terms of impact investing, what kind of organizations are we looking at? Are we looking at private sectors, or are we looking at the legal entity as being a civil society entity like a Section 8 company or a trust or a foundation? What kind of a company are we talking about when we talk about impact investing?
Yeah, so I'll take a step back in terms of the how this whole thing has evolved in South Asia, not just India. Is that
right?
Initially, this whole impact investing started with a motive that we wanted to have non-profits becoming more sustainable. So most of the microfinance were the first experimental zone, if you put like this, early 2000. And they were supported by various foundations from India, outside India purely. and then they graduate into a for-profit structures. So in India, just to be clear, the only investable kind of a legal structures that we can have is a for-profit, a private limited.
Yeah.
And this is the structure which has strengthened out as we have moved in. And many companies also have a very different kind of a take, which is a hybrid structure where you have a non-profit and a for-profit. But investing in the right sense of word is that means if you're investing, you will need the return back as well. And financial return, everybody knows, but there is something called social return as well. So both the things gets combined. That's what we are talking in. But the difference at a larger level is like B Corp in US is a formalized structure of a social enterprise. In India, we don't have something like that. It may evolve after a few years. We are obviously talking, most of us are trying to talk and trying to lobby it out as well. But having said that, India has been at the forefront of social enterprise movement globally. We are the most important practitioners, a specific zone where we have huge amount of social entrepreneurs who have come in and made a difference to the society, at the same time made the enterprises more sustainable as well. And in that aspect, if we see, one of the important impediment is that if you're doing some kind of a larger social good, which is primarily allowing you to further the cause of, let's say, education, healthcare, clean energy, waste management, financial inclusion, and others, that's what we are kind of trying to talk about it. And this is the most important, vital, I will say, framework of any society as well, as we say.
Right. So basically, we are talking about SROI, right? So we are moving ROI to SROI. Okay. So when we are talking about social return on investment, Anuj, and I'm very keen to understand what are the specific metrics that we are looking at, and I would guess that it would vary from, company to company, but what are the generalized metrics that we have to are looking at when, the impact investors are looking at?
Yeah. So first, let me just put the very clear demarcation that if I'm an investor, whether I'm impact investor normal, I would expect a return. So far, we are more focused towards the financial return. But when you are talking about impact investor, then the financial return are, yes, expected, but at a lesser notch. But in a long term, if you say past 10 years, surprisingly, the mainstream investors return and impact investor returns were more or less similar. So if you have a kind of a rabbit and a tortoise story, the tortoise walks slow with a lesser speed, but it is consistent. And that's what has been happening in impact investing. Whether you have inflation or you have a high growth thing, it will go steady. And this is what we are kind of talking about it. Now, there has been a big debate, and obviously people like us who are practitioners, also investors at the cross section, are trying to assimilate social return along with their financial return as well. So I remember we were experimenting in Nepal, a clean water company, and we were trying to say in terms of valuation terms, it was not very exciting an opportunity for an investor. But the moment you talk about a social return in the similar thing, because they were kind of reducing huge amount of plastic waste, the bottles. Second is they were also trying to reduce the kind of diseases which comes, the waterborne diseases in Nepal, hilly areas. So why not we give them the benefit of that whole things that they were doing? And they may have done many other things. They had a choice, but they got a very conscious thing that they wanted to have the right kind of clean drinking water made available to Himalayan people at that time. So we experimented with this whole thing. So a typical financial model, as we see, has huge amount of financial return aspect which is there. But at the same time, in the social return on investment, when we talk about, it is still evolving, if I put it like this. And there are various metrics which are also there. For every segment, there are different metrics. But there is not one very holistic metrics which are there. So people like us are kind of putting it forth, the argument that it needs to be simple. It needs to be very easy to quantify. And also it is easy to measure time and again, so that there is a very clear monitoring evaluation which could be done. And the entrepreneur gets a benefit out of it as well. And thankfully, there has been some pilots which have already been done. And as we are talking, there are many other enterprises which are already using this whole methodology to further their cause in terms of making them investment worthy cases as well.
Exactly, because in my mind, that's also, it will also stem from the vision mission of the company, because the impact is what the company wants to impact. So that's in their vision, and that impact is, what kind of translates into more revenue and return on investment, even from the investor's point of view. Thank you so much. I think this was, a very, and I especially like the hare and the tortoise example. That's extremely nice. So tell me, can a private limited company get a grant? An investment they can get, but can it also get a grant?
So first of all, let me put it across the horizon of women entrepreneurs in the country.
Yes.
Okay, and then we can get into this whole thing. So first is, if you see in terms of the larger ecosystem, we have less than 10% investment goes into women-led organizations. Second, we have huge amount of organizations which claim them to be focused with women, but they are not women-led. So microfinance is a great example, which has been at the forefront of the maximum amount of impact money which has gone in. But majority of founders were not women, and they were focusing on women, 100% women, if we put it like this. And today, when we are talking, there are not less than 150 million customers which are microfinance borrowers. Now, if I see it, like when we talk about women entrepreneurs, we keep talking about micro entrepreneurs. We don't talk about SMEs. And that is a very big fundamental difference between when we talk about a normal men-led organizations, we talk about SMEs, we talk about high growth entities. The moment we talk about women, we say, okay, let's do the capacity building. Let's do this. Let's do a small thing. Like I was in Northeast and there was a World Bank program which was happening in, and they were saying, let's create micro entrepreneurs, all women. How many? 1 million micro entrepreneurs. But if I ask how many micro entrepreneurs have gone to the SME, that is not existing. The data is not existing. Now coming to the next level, as a for-profit entity, you have far more social enterprise. You have a far more like variety of capital which is available to you, which is not existing in a mainstream one. So obviously grant is one of the form which is there, but you also have equity, you have debt. And then there is a very amazing ecosystem and also the alternate finance structure, which is called blended finance, which is coming. And that means it is a simulation of grant and also a risk investor coming together to further the cause of getting the social enterprise, getting to the next level of, let's say, working capital or some other bottlenecks. But at the same time, there is another important thing is that you need a far more patient capital. So many people keep asking me like, what is the difference between, let's say, a women-led organization with a men and some other things. So I take an example in microfinance, majority of them were non-profits when they started. Foundations gave them money to fail. They did not give them money to succeed. And they said, okay, let's do the experiment. Some of them may succeed and become sustainable. Can we do the same thing with the women entrepreneurs? Can we have more patient capital? That's a question we need to answer and get it in the forefront when we are talking about women entrepreneurs as well.
Excellent. Okay. And now coming to something very personal and, question. See, mine is an OPC. It's a one-person company. So for a one-person company, what kind of impact investment can we get?
Yeah. So the first important thing is like legal structures, even though it looks very simple, are biggest bottleneck or impediment for investment. In India, we have LLPs which can get investments. OPC can get investment. You can also have a couple of other structures which can get investment, but out and out 100% investment primarily comes in only one structure called private limited. So either we fight the system and say, hey, look, we would like to, because it's a regulatory permissible thing, we can get into OPC or LLP. But then if the investor clarity is there and they also have their lawyers and also their advisors are more comfortable with the private limited structure, my request will be, if you are saying about one OPC, it will also have some kind of a bottleneck in the way they will perceive the growth of the enterprise and also the exits. So it will be important if we can kind of assimilate that whole thing in a very simple structure, which is also having lots of case laws and also protections, which as an investor, I'm comfortable with to begin with. So at this point of time, if you are asking, my request is go for private limited, no other structures. Even though the compliance cost looks higher, yes, it is there. And there are a couple of other options as well. But having a more trustworthy structure, which is also comfortable for the investors in a larger way, is a far more important thing for you to grow.
Okay. Thank you. I think this was a great clarification. But OPC is also a private limited company, but even then you would suggest that, OPC, with directors, with multiple directors, we have with multiple directors, right? So that's the structure we're talking about.
Yeah, so if I can get into more granular thing, I can take a full, because I take the full session or chapter on this thing in this, talking about legal structures. So I'll not go too much deeper into it, but as I said, like 1% entity vis-a-vis privately entity has lots of challenges. Like if you compare from the investor point of view, an investor may want to put up their money. At the same time, they need shares, and the shares needs to be liquidated at some point of time so they can get exit. They also need some kind of board positions if they are putting considerable money. At the same time, the company as a whole should also have many other partners. You may have, let's say, a CTO, you may have a CGO, you may have other people also who would like to come and work with you. And they also would like to become, let's say, at some point of time, not today, as a co-founder and other things. So from here, if we kind of talk about it, as I said, private limited is a more stable, trustworthy structure at this point of time. And as I said, like 100% investment in startups in India, 100% I'm talking, goes in private limited. And OPC is also, there's another side. It's a very new structure. So there are not many case laws which are there, which can kind of tell you that whether this is good or bad. And second is also that there are lots of other challenges which are there as it happens. When you come up with a new regulation, there will be a lot of new challenges as well, hidden one. Like just to convert a OPC to private limited, it takes time. And let's say if you want to close the OPC, there are a few other aspects as well, which are gray areas. So either we keep, as an entrepreneur, you keep exploring new areas, or go with something which is more easier and trustworthy.
Right. Thank you so much, Anuj. So now coming back to investments again, how can they be prepared? How can these private sectors be prepared to be investment ready?
Yeah. So
the kind of documentation that has to be built around.
Again, documentation is far off. I will put it like this. First of all, your intent should be positive. Okay. So unless you don't have a positive intent to further the cause of social thing properly, then you cannot tell yourself as a social enterprise. You don't have something called B Corp, another thing where you are getting a certified social enterprise tag. So in India, it's all about narrative. It's all about your intent. So that's the first thing. So as an entrepreneur, you need to be good at storytelling. And if not storytelling in per se, you can have people who can do storytelling for you for the good cause you are trying to do. And if your intents are good, and you are talking about some kind of community engagement, some kind of a betterment of some kind of a other underserved market and other things, that's where the magic comes in. And what the most amazing thing is that the multiplier effect is far more intense and better than mainstream. So just imagine, let's say I am a big corporate and I'm working in a mine sector and I'm working in a tribal area. And even if I'm earning $1 billion, I may have a challenge that my brand gets screwed and my work gets stopped. The reason is because I'm kind of trying to do something which is not socially relevant. And today, like just yesterday, there was a big rally in Germany talking about climate change and other things. So the whole social aspect is coming into the forefront. The same way, if you are doing something good and you have a capability to have the outreach, now that's where sometimes we have a challenge, and that's what we have to improve upon. So one is a storytelling, then the overall narrative, and then making this whole thing as an investment worthy cause. That these three things comes further in terms of telling to the outside world that, hey, look, let's partner. So investment is just like a partner. Like you need raw material. So money is one of the raw material. It's not the only thing for which you start your enterprise. You have a far bigger vision, and money allows you to get to that vision in a slightly faster way.
Exactly. And we keep hearing about predatory investors. So who are these people, and what is the predatory nature of these kind of investors?
Yeah, so I'll put it across very. Everybody was talking about a recent one IPO which happened in US, which gave $13 billion to Freshworks, right? And everybody was celebrating because we have got 70 crore-patis and all kinds of things we talk about. Like obviously everything is gender focused, like patis, not patnis kind of thing they talk about. But the very fact is that the founder just has 6% stake in that. And if you see majority of Indian startups who have crossed, not even like I will say billion, I'm talking about even a $50 million mark, are in minority today. Majority of them. That means the investor drive. And one of the reason is that when you are looking into this sector, even though we have a very good ecosystem of investors coming and investing, India is like one of the top 3 like geographies for all of it. But at the same time, one of the larger things is that we do not have proper protections built into it. Like in terms of how this whole ecosystem of, I will say, the founders related rights are there. At the same time, we also do not have lots of advocacy related things which are spoken around. You will not see enough articles about it. We keep celebrating, oh, $1 billion has happened, 100 millions happened. But I've seen from my own eyes, the microfinance entities from where I started out the whole journey, like top 8 microfinance, which became bank today, where are the founders? Majority of them have founders which are on the brink of getting ousted by the investors because they are in minority. So we need to have some kind of a way by which we distinguish a right intent investors vis-a-vis investors who are having some kind of other challenges as well coming.
Yes, exactly, yeah. Exactly. I think very well put, because, and this is something which is extremely important even as we speak, because India has become the 3rd largest startup ecosystem in the world after China and US. So all the Mishos and Olas and Oyos and Baijos of the world, have been unicorns and have taken up, has kind of set certain benchmarks. And it's become very, aspirational for startups to go their line, but, they don't know the risk that comes with it. So in fact, this could be, one entire session where we could talk about the different risks to look out for. Thank you, Anuj, for pointing this out. Can you please, just mention how does debt investment work? Because, you are at we are speaking on a topic where there are so many questions. And, I've also been receiving quite a number of questions in the last couple of days, ever since this session was announced. So I'll keep asking you quite a number of them. So Anuj, it may sometimes go backward and forward, but these are all very valid questions which are there in the mind of startups and other peers. So yes, how does debt investment work, Anuj?
So I'll put a very more broader thing here. Like when you are talking of women entrepreneurship, one of the other larger thing is that women are more smarter in terms of risk appetite. So they say, we don't want to dilute ourselves too much. We like to have more predictable risk coming. So what does this mean is, if you are looking in most of the startups in India, they all are heavy on equity. All are heavy on equity. I'm saying majority of them are. The reason is because we keep having a social pressure around that we should raise equity investments, raise high amount of equity investment, dilute us too much and too much. At the same time, very few people are talking about the beauty of having debt investment. So your leverage needs to be there. And leverage, how it will come is, you can easily have 1:4 to 6 times of leverage. That means if I raise a $1 million round of equity, I can easily have up till $4 million or above debt as well. But very few startups think about that. And rather than that, they will go for equity dilution faster. And in a very simple finance term or even investment terms, if somebody asks you, what is the most costly capital you have? I will say equity. This is the most precious thing. That's the only thing which is left for me. So in terms of women entrepreneurs, the most amazing thing is that if you talk at length about this whole way of investing, they understand debt far better than men. And that's a fact I have also learned in my house. And one of the important things is that if you are giving debt, they have a much more disciplined approach to give that debt back. That's the same thing which has been proven in microfinance as well. 99% repayments, which happens throughout. And it is not even secured. It is all unsecured thing. And if we kind of get to the next level, another thing is that very few of us as a professionals explains the beauty of how to kind of get the basics right in terms of debt, and also strengthen your value proposition at a larger level. Now my valuations may be increasing, but if I'm diluting too fast by Series A, Series B, I'm already less than 50%. That means I'm at the mercy of investors. And this is something which 90% of the startups in India by Series B are less than 50%. That means they have already lost their majority. And then the larger thing is that we don't have shareholder activism in a proper way, and also differential voting rights. Like Mark Zuckerberg has less than 20% stake in the company, but he has 80% voting rights. Bill Gates, very recently, he had just 2% stake in Microsoft, but still had majority of decision-making powers. But in India, even though we have from the corporate law, but if you ask most of the lawyers, the deal-making lawyers, they will not even talk about it. The reason is because they don't want to annoy their investor clients. And there is another larger thing. Majority of lawyers that we are talking, including people like us all, we work for investors because they pay us. So the loyalty is not with the entrepreneurs, the loyalty is with the investors. So when you kind of talk about the debt kind of instrument, this is, first of all, it is far easier as well. At the same time, even though it looks risky that what if I fail? But then if you are having a fear of what if I fail, then you cannot have a startup. You need to have more kind of a courage. And especially in India, it is not for faint-hearted if you want to have a startup. And the second thing, which is more important, is that at today's level, there is a very amazing ecosystem where for women-led enterprises, there are a huge amount of guarantee schemes which are there, not just from India, but even from outside. So USAID has a $30 million guarantee scheme only for women-led organizations in India, where they say, if banks are not able to give you, we will give you the guarantee. And on the basis of guarantee, you can get a working capital at 7 to 8% interest rates.
Thank you so much. Yes, and yes, I know I agree with this debt thing because we don't talk about it much. And you know, there was a friend and we were talking together. So most of the time what happens with startups is their entire focus then becomes getting that investment and not focusing on the work in building up the investment. And once they get the investment, then after that, they don't know what to do. So, you know, we were like joking that it's like, you know, in earlier times, it's like a marriage. So once you get married, then you don't know, you think, you know, your life has come to an end, but it's not that. It's only the beginning. The investment is only the beginning of what you want to do of, you know, attaining our vision. Exactly. Okay, so what are the different alternate financing options? We have talked about equity, debt, grants, predatory investors. Are there, and what are the other alternate? Are we missing out on something, Anuj?
Many. Yeah, there are many. So people like me, like I'd been fighting out for last 13 years. At the time I came into development sectors, I was amused by fun fact. The richer the person is, the easier the access to finance. Like I'm talking about debt as well. So if I'm a certain ex corporate, I can get the loan at 1% interest rate, which is like unheard of for people. Like, and this moment I'm talking about, let's say somebody who's poor, or the so-called poor, let's say, I'm saying microfinance women, they are paying the interest of 24%, 28%, or earlier they were paying 36% as well. They are comfortable. They are fine to get that kind of interest. But what happens is when you have a very high amount of interest, you can't come out of the poverty level because you will be serving your interest most of the time rather than making wealth for yourself and getting to the next level. So in that case, there had been a big movement shift of alternate finance. And in India, a certain amount of movement is happening. But as I say, global North has been doing it more. And that is where the global South can kind of converge in as well. And if we kind of get into the other sides, one of the things is like many of us forget the power of friends and family. So we talk about, let's say, celebrating our birthdays, marriages, and other things. Why not we celebrate a startup? And specifically, women startup can celebrate more. They have a far more jazzier thing. So let's say if you start a startup which is led by women, we say let's converge in. And obviously, we need to have some kind of simple structures by which we can say, okay, friends and family are coming. We need some pool of money so that you can sustain for 1 year. And we have some kind of instruments which are easier, like convertible instruments could be used even at family friend round. And that can also allow the startup to have some kind of freedom to kind of experiment, because at the initial stage, you want to do more experimenting, pivoting of your models or strengthening your models. And the second thing is that family and friend may also get some kind of a clear return if the startup grows very well. And if they don't grow very well, they also have a way of a kind of clawing by slightly more stake. So that's one aspect if I put like this. Then the larger aspect is you have huge amount of things like guarantee schemes, as I was telling you. But at the same time, there is also something called milestone-based equity, which is coming in. So let's say I'm an investor based out of Vera, and I'll say I'm trying to do something in climate change, and there's a women-led organization which is trying to do, let's say, in rooftop and others. I would like to help that women, and not just help, I also grow myself by giving more equity. If she do more, let's say, installations in rural areas. Let's say if the rural area installation of that clean energy portfolio becomes more than 50%, I'm going to do, let's say, if I'm putting $1 million, I'll put 1 million extra. That kind of a aspect. And also my valuation can go 0.5x more, that kind of thing. That's one. Then you have something called masala bond. Very few people have explored it, but that's something which has been promoted by Government of India and still like kind of being there in certain ways. So it's primarily, if you ask me, it's ECB convert, like it's INR denominated bond in ECB. And you can actually raise from philanthropic organizations or also development financial institutions across outside India. They are comfortable to lend at as good as principal plus zero rate. So that means you have to get it here. Now, grants all said and done has huge regulatory challenges, sticky in terms of its own way. What if you raise this kind of a blended options where you are having as good as very affordable rate? So masala bond can allow you to raise foreign debt at a interest rate of, let's say, 1%, 2%, 3% at INR denominated way. Same way, you have some other structures which are also there where you say first loss guarantee kind of thing. Now, these things have also been built in India. Government of India is doing it. You also have SIDBI, which has done it, and so on and so forth. But the challenge is that the language is so difficult. Your chartered accountants understand it. You don't understand. And that is also one of the challenges in the ecosystem. We have very few professionals who understand the larger ecosystem of startup. A traditional way obviously is known. So we need to have some kind of advocacy related thing around how to kind of open up the investment related horizons, and more options should be there. And if one option is not working, then the second option can come. If not second, then the third. Or it can also happen that two options can hedge against the third option that we are talking about.
Right. Brilliant, brilliant, Anuj. You spoke about so many things, in this discussion. You spoke about debt. You spoke about, the crowdfunding from among family and friends, how we can open up the crowdfunding scenario among family and friends. And also, also getting the ownership buy-in so that, if they are also spending that amount, they are also having an ownership into how it is being spent. And they can also act as checks and balances. I think this is brilliant. And of course, the masala bond. We will go for the next questions after this, but let us just check some of the chat questions. And Anuj, please, if you have to drink some water, take 1 minute to drink some water.
Yeah.
You've been.
I'm doing it. That's absolutely yes.
Okay. So yes, there are quite a few questions, and this comes from Radhika. So thank you for such an insightful session. I was hoping you could shed some light on funding structures in place for non-profit ventures. How does one go about scaling non-profits?
Yeah, so if I my first few years, I was believing when I got into development sector that I wanted to see for-profit social structures mostly. And thanks to TISS, I felt like and my own learning while I was teaching in TISS for last few years is that we need to have civil society, which is equally important like the for-profit structures. And non-profit structures also are very, very important as a social fabric that we are trying to talk about, because most of the non-profits are focusing causes which may not make money. And if you want to see the way non-profits can grow, we have huge amount of regulatory challenges which have also come in. The strengthening of regulations, which have kind of created huge amount of bottlenecks for smaller non-profits. Now you don't have a sub-grant option, which if I'm outside India, I would like to park to a larger foundation in India because I have some kind of a trust. And that larger foundation then decimate that funding to a smaller foundation. Now that has stopped. Now, as a smaller non-profit, if you want to now kind of think through more innovatively, the options have become much difficult. So if I talk about a larger way of enterprise building, this is the right time. So think of hybrid structures, because one is, if you are scuttled with regulations and you say, I would like to die, just because you are doing the regulations are having some kind of impediment today, but they are not kind of talking about a wrong intent kind of thing. But what happens, the yardstick is same. The yardstick, when I say same, is, let's say you're a bad NGO, good NGO, the yardstick is same for all the ones from the law aspect. But from the intent perspective, you see, nonprofits have an intent of doing something positive, good for the society. And in that aspect, if we see, we need to have a far more innovative way of reaching out now. Crowdfunding has been there, like Keto is there, Impact Guru is there, Rangde is there, many others like Milap and others, which are primarily doing crowdfunding for nonprofits. They have a small markup fees as well, Give India as well. But at the same time, still majority of nonprofits find it very difficult to sustain because of the way the grant options are happening. And also after COVID, majority of grant has gone into COVID. Like that is also one of the things. So we need to find a way where we can converge with respect to some kind of a sustainable form. And that is what has been advocated in terms of how the social enterprise can work. So look around how you are primarily kind of finding a sweet spot. So one of the examples I can say is one of my students, she was in who was my student in this, and she was focusing on the breast cancer survivors. And she had a big challenge that when she was training the women in terms of breast cancer and also training in terms of rehabilitation and also some kind of psychological aspects, they were all non-money generating aspects because the women were in trauma and other things. So all these things, we decided that it will park into non-profit. And she was also making lots of products with respect to prosthetics and few other things that were parked in for-profit. So this hybrid structure was a very big strength, if you put like this. And 3 years down the line, it became much more easier and stronger as well, if you put it like that. So we need to be innovative, as I say. You should not leave your good work just because of certain impediment in terms of fundraising. And then there's a much more larger thing which is there. As a non-profit, you are the only person who was the spokesperson and outreach person. So how much good your network is? And you need to keep enhancing your network far wide than what your local ecosystem is, because you will not be going to get from the local ecosystem the kind of grants you're going. So you need to have very strong network, not just within your local ecosystem, but national and international as well. And now, because of all this internet and other things, the fact that we are here, all of us, that means we have a strong ecosystem. Seek help. Don't be afraid of listening no. Seek help. And help is not something which you are doing for yourself. You are doing for the cause of the beneficiaries you are trying to talk about.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you, Anuj. I think, you also answered this question, also answered one of the questions that I had after this. I'll take another question, and I think that question is also linked to something that I have with me as well, which Aparna writes, that, and she takes from your hair and tortoise examples. Startups are defined by agility and speed. How can social impact startups build in this expectation? Would this impact their chances to raise funding? Yes, this again, the dilemma between fast and slow, the fast fashions versus slow fashion. So how do you kind of really measure this kind of impact, Anuj?
So one of the typical way in mainstream way we raise funds is we have 5-year projections and we show exponential growth. Exponential growth is like, if I have $1 I'm kind of earning today, I will show $1 million earning in a 5-year span. And my assumption is that I will raise funds every year. That's the way the typical model works. Why not we have a way, and specifically it is also a responsible professionals or even investors, to elongate that expectations time. Make it 7 years, make it 10 years. And if you ask me, education for most of the time cannot be having a very clear upside unless you have a more patient capital coming in. So 7 to 10 years is a normal tenure. So if I'm an investor who would like to go in 3 years or 5 years, then social enterprise is not the right place for you. Most of the social enterprise takes more time. But at the same time, since they take more time, it doesn't mean that they are kind of having any kind of a challenging thing. So from my practitioner's head, if I put it like this, Take a 5 years plan and you have exponential growth. Take a 7 years plan, 2 years more, or maybe 8 years plan. You are adding 2 years or 3 years in your financial model. You will get to the same result. It's a financial jargon. You create your Excel sheets and create some expectations as well.
Exactly.
And in that aspect, also build in some kind of a way by which you also having some kind of a way to put debt into it. Most of the financial model does not show debt. In an early stage, at seed stage, Series A, Series B, when you see the financial model, they have zero debt into it. And also they show a very high exponential 5 years growth. To demystify that, get to 7 years and question your own, like let's say experts who are working with you. Can we have some kind of a way, alternate structures by which we can have funding coming in and also showing the profits, not in an exponential way, but in a slightly slower way, but steady way coming in.
Exactly. I think, yes. So I myself, I'm creating an urban forest.
Yeah.
So when I'm creating an urban forest, exactly, it tallies with what you're saying. I can't tell anybody what I'm seeing now, but 4 years hence, I know the kind of carbon it will sequester and what its value is going to be. So yeah, it's slow. It's slow, but it's sure. It's like the tortoise. It will steadily grow if I'm reaping it now. So coming to the next question here, and yes, and it also kind of tallies with quite a number of questions. I'll just quickly, speak up to Ashwin. Ashwin Lohar has a question that investment in non-profit, what are the criteria? I think you have already, Anuj, mentioned those. Rajul Patkar says, shouldn't it be that startups are celebrated by media not only when they raise investment? Of course, they should always by the what they do. Yes.
What is happening is, like, if you see not just media, also the professionals who are associated. Today, if I'm a lawyer, which is an M&A, if I'm a chartered accountant in M&A, if I'm a, let's say, investment banker primarily for raising funds, I'm in the top of my hierarchy. Or if I'm coming out of my, let's say, engineering college, I've invested 4 precious years in taking my engineering degree. I jump into an investment fund. The reason is because it looks very fancy. A huge amount of media like light into it, and there's a limelight. There's a huge amount of social pressures that, oh, I'm doing something very good. But if you go back, let's say in California, or you go back in some other geographies, there the entrepreneurs are celebrated, not the investors. Most of the time, the kind of protagonist, the just like the movie stars, if you put like the other startups, you will seldom hear about investors. Very few are there. And even if you are investors, most of the time they will be the entrepreneurs who converted to investors, that kind of things which are there. But here, because it's still evolving geography, we keep celebrating our investors as gods or demigods, as we put it like this, because there is a scarcity of capital. But that is going to change as we are progressing further. And there is also a very big bias, as we put it like this, in terms of media. If you are a normal startup, social startup, and you would like to publish yourself in media, you will be refused, or you will be asked to pay a huge amount of money to publish your articles. But the moment you raise funds, your news will be published free of cost, because they also need more readers. So what we are having is the ecosystem is all biased about success side. What about failures? Now, I take a very simple example. Jet Airways was one of the most successful airline company in the country for 25 years. They failed, yes, but as humans, we all are as startups can also die, but we keep harping on the failures. The same way in India, if you fail as a startup, you have a lots of stigma. So first of all, we need to come out of it. Like if you fail, that's fine. So in startups, specific in social startup, if I put like this, there is only 2 things you primarily gain. Either you succeed or you learn. There's nothing called failure. So let's teach our people around, our peers, our kids, or other people that having a startup is the greatest achievement as a humankind. And if you are not able to succeed, you will learn and become much wiser in terms of your social norms and also social status later on.
Exactly, Anuj. And especially when we're talking about impact organizations. So even if you have failed, you have impacted. Okay. So some ways or the other, you have impacted. So you can never fail. You have learned and you have impacted, and that impact will grow by itself. Because that is the beauty of impact, that it grows by itself. You would have touched few lives, you would have touched few things. Anuj, excellent. Okay, so now I'm coming to some of my questions. And this is like about enterprise building, okay? And we talk about enterprises, but what does it take, and what are the different parameters of building an enterprise, especially an impact enterprise?
So I'll give a small like anecdote here. Like I was in Ladakh and I was talking to a girl who was trying to start a social enterprise of her, like in terms of helping the local artisans and getting into the next step. I said, what is your value of the company? She, first of all, she was confused. Second, she said, 5 lakh. I said, great. I'll put 5 lakh rupees. You need to be bonded laborer for the next 5 years. The reason I'm talking about this small anecdote is not one. The same thing happened in my own class in Bombay, which is like so-called like the place where people will know about it, where one of my students said, sir, my value of the company is 1 lakh rupees. The same way, if I go to Northeast or I go to South, everywhere it's a similar thing, because the reason I'm talking about this whole thing is, if I talk about enterprise building thing, it has not been taught the way it should be. We need to have some kind of practitioners approach coming in. So enterprise building, the reason it is called enterprise building is you have a small idea as a micro enterprise, single person. The moment you kind of make as an enterprise, that means you will have more people coming as partners or collaborators, clients or vendors, something like that. And you're trying to scale up to the next level. You need more support. The support could be in terms of proper partners, but there could also be support in terms of investors coming in and they will earn. So they are partners. They are not so-called investors. Then you may have bankers who want to support because they also want to earn. So everybody is wanting to earn. So why not you make up a stage by which you're able to kind of spin off your whole idea in a bigger canvas. And in that bigger canvas, one of the most important is enterprise building initiative. It takes time. One of the things is the enterprise building means you, first of all, as an entrepreneur, you need to be clear that I'm ready to scale. That's first. Second is when you say I'm ready to scale, you need to have converging forces around you who also understand that you are ready to scale. So whether it is your employee, first employee, or let's say you're an intern, or let's say your client, everybody starts thinking that there is a brand building initiative coming in. Most of us get a mistake, and I will say myself as well, not to kind of go further. We feel like we are the brand ourselves and we can get into it. But that is a more consultative approach. The moment you get into enterprise building is that you're trying to say that I'm going to create jobs. I'm going to create a more sustainable organization. At some point of time, even if I don't want to work for the idea I've nurtured in, I'll still may have a way of earning money out of it, or also sustaining and also passing the legacy to somebody else more worthy. And that enterprise building initiative means you're going from a micro entrepreneur mindset to a small and medium enterprise mindset, which is a very, very important thing for all of us. And majority of us cannot think that way. So I'll put it another example. Let's say I'm coming out of IIT Bombay and I'm not taking a placement. Now, if I go in a placement, I'm a bright student, I'll get a package of 50 lakh to 1 crore today. It's very simple. And nowadays, IIT people are in big demand. But at the same time, I've chosen to start something. So why not at least I be valued in a way that my interest, or let's say the kind of benefit which I've foregone, should be rewarded in some way. I'm anyways the last person to get the benefit, but at least allow me to have that kind of basic values coming into the organization. Second is also the instrument should be flexible enough to get the enterprise building initiative coming properly. And that is what, if I put it like this, in our academia, also in terms of the way we talk about startups, we need to talk about thinking as a SME, thinking of having convergence of jobs, thinking of convergence as some kind of a mentorship as well, which is very important. And also ecosystem of peers who can talk through each other and learn about it. And that's the enterprise building thing which I will put across, which is very important.
Right. I think this ecosystem building is key. And I really liked something that you mentioned earlier on as well, that also, having an ecosystem of professionals around you, because unless, we are speaking the same language, the ecosystem does not come out as, seamless. So we have diversity within the ecosystem, but the language and the purpose, we are linked with a similar purpose. Anuj, thank you so much about this. Now, again, because we talked about ecosystem, we talked about different, people coming in and entering at different points. So now, what is the importance of team? So how, the right team, how to get to that right team. So that's the question. So what is the importance of a good team?
So one of the pressures of a startup to raise funds is that they are kind of in a flux that they cannot attract talent if they don't have money, which is true to a larger extent in terms of the stage which we are at today. However, if you have the right way of valuing the company and also structuring certain instruments in you can get a right kind of motivated team members who might be comfortable with cash and options, stock options, if you put like that. So now, in terms of IITs, yes, this is a very acceptable norm now. Many people are aware, and also, I will say, thanks to the academia, professors, and lots of like mentors around in IITs, that you have got that kind of clarity done. But now let's take this thing beyond as well, so that people are understanding about the team, how they can converge it. Second is we have to also let go of the micro entrepreneur mindset where we say 100% has to be owned by me. That's it. But the moment we talk about enterprise building, we should also be comfortable about letting go of the kind of larger ownership driven approach towards partner approach. So if you are having an employee, you have to see whether that employee is integral part of you from the beginning and they are going to the next level with you. And you need to reward them. And reward could be in cash, which we all know, but can we reward them with ownership? And that is something which is very, very important at a startup level. So having some kind of a marked stocks for employees is a very important signal that we talk about it. And second, there needs to also be a way by which we also try to find a way where the team, initial team at least, if you put it like this, find the very purpose for which they've joined. So if they are joining a startup for job, then you are not finding the right employee. You're failed. So you need to find a way to attract that kind of people who come to you as a profession, not as a job. And majority of time we fail in terms of finding the right kind of people is because we keep harping in terms of a person who is looking for a job, desperate for it, and we give them a job. So that person is not motivated to work with you. And if they are not motivated, what on earth the benefit they will give it to you as well? Because they just want to have some kind of a way which is robotic work. So let's get over that. And are we giving the right kind of mission about us, the why of the enterprise to the person who's joining us? Most of us do not invest that much of time as a startup.
Yes, yeah, I think you spoke about this transformation from empathy for the person to empathy for the cause. So if the person has an empathy for a cause, then he or she will be passionate enough to drive it along with you and for the cause. So I think this was an excellent transformation that you spoke about. Even the companies that have grown for like in Infosys, they always had this profit sharing things right at the beginning, and we were fortunate to be growing up during that time when we have seen our colleagues, our friends getting into those profit sharing options. Okay. So I think this also kind of answers the challenges faced. Yeah, because you also discussed about the challenges that we might face and how to overcome these challenges. Let's take some of the questions, Anuj, and there are quite a number of very long questions. Okay, so now we have a question from what is the minimum amount one can raise with debt funding? And this question comes from Rijul Patkar.
So minimum amount is all dependent on, like, if I go straight to the bank, they will say, what is your net worth? And then they will calculate and get it to the next level. So in terms of women entrepreneurs, there is a very unique feature, which primarily, and I'm not talking about just India. I was in San Francisco. I was taking a session, and in the full big, I will say the plenary session, I was asking how many women here have credit cards. So out of I think it was close to 150 women who were there, and they were also some of them were also fund managers and others. Out of 150, not even 30 had credit cards. They were not spending. So how the whole credit bureaus work, we need to crack it as well if you need to get into debt. So they reward spending. They don't reward saving. So if you're a woman who's only saving and never spent on credit card, never taken any loan, nothing, your credit scores are pathetic and you are not going to raise any money from debt part. So if you need to have a way by which you want debt to be raised, you need to find a way to hack the system. That means I'm not saying I'm not a very big advocate of credit cards or debit cards or something like that. But however, the credit bureaus needs to change, but they may change after 10 years. So today, if I want to do some kind of a loan related thing, if you want to raise, first of all, please get yourself into the credit bureau, get into the CIBIL score. You need to find it. The way you need to get it is get a credit card, spend it, pay back in the same month. Don't kind of get into the elongated way of, I'm not saying encouraging spending behaviors, but I'm saying small payments you may be making. Let's say for commute, for travel tickets, a few other things, keep paying it. So more than anything, it is building your credit score. Believe me, this credit score is what is going to get you the debt. And it is very, very important when you are in women entrepreneur. And this is something which many people have studied and tried doing it. So there's no single bank, so-called, if I put like this, which understands this women's sensibility, that they can give loan to them without a credit score. In India, not a single bank will give you. That's a problem. And if I'm a NBFC, which is going to give a women a loan without a proper CIBIL score, my interest rates will be more than 20%. That is not favorable for you. So please try to hack the system. And that is not something very difficult.
Okay. I was ready for many answers, Anuj, but never for this answer. So thank you. I think this is a brilliant new perspective that you put forward. Now, this is Madhavi. Madhavi has a question. Do impact investors prefer hybrid business models over for-profit ones? So this again has been, one other question. So this is two. So there are three people who's asking the same question. What are the merits of a hybrid model and whether impact investors prefer hybrid model?
So investor impact, like if I say investors per se, and then impact investors, all of them will prefer a for-profit model because they need the return back. The hybrid is for your own convenience, so that you are primarily, if there is a cause which you are supporting, which is completely a cost thing. Let's say I'm talking about education, EdTech venture. And in EdTech venture, there is a clear path where I say, okay, I'm giving this specific module to the students, they're paying for it. But as a founder, I have a passion that I would like to support the same module to people who are not able to pay me. Now, it may happen that the investors doesn't want it. So you may park as a non-profit, which could be supported by grants. So technically, in a very straight one sentence, if you ask me, they prefer a for-profit structure.
Okay. How would you, Radhika has a question, how would you recommend measuring impact in social ventures? And based on that, how can one go about assigning a monetary value to a social impact-based startup? And she goes on to ask, are startups with specific financial projections given preference by investors and funding platforms? So there are three questions, Anuj, all related.
So you're talking about a segment where the investor is men, the professional most probably who's helping you is men, and also the person who's coming for diligence is also men, and also the person who's going to do your audit is also men. So you're surrounded with men with certain biases, if I put it like this. So if you are kind of getting into this thing, one of the important things is that the social return on investment measurement is still evolving. In India, still the funding is not coming. Like in a for-profit enterprise, social return on investment is not factored in the valuation part. In a non-profit, it is done. That's a very simple thing. You have a project and they see what are the causes you have and what kind of specific outcomes you've got, and they measure it and do it. But this is one of the specific aspect which I'm pushing, and similar kind of people in my own, like I will say, ecosystem are pushing it, that we should reward for-profit enterprises for doing social good as well. So the way you are saying, like if you want to have an urban forest, that means lots of carbon footprint should be reduced. So why not we find a way to reward you with carbon credits? That's a simple thing. Second thing could be, let's say if carbon credit does not come because it is very complicated, can we have some way by which we can reward you for getting much more fresher air for people around you? And for that, we should pay. So as a community, we should find a way. So that's where the alternate finance structures are primarily coming in a popular manner. So as we are talking, I'm trying to put up a structure, a financing vehicle, by which we are seeing if blended finance instruments could be accelerated in the country, where huge amount of, let's say, foundations are across the world, which are there. And there are huge amount of development institutions which are primarily giving, let's say if I'm KKR, the biggest funder in the world, like a private equity fund, they get money at 1%, like a rate from a big DFIs, big money at 1%. The same way, if I talk about big business houses in India, Reliance, Tatas and others, ask the interest rates they get from the banks, it's zilch, very, very low. So what if we find a way to have a financial institution which can primarily galvanize these low-cost structures for the benefit of social enterprise at large? And in that, there is a very clear measurement aspect which comes in. So one of the impact investor primarily did the same thing. So they gave a soft loan to a education venture in Bangalore. And they said it is of 14% interest rate. But if you kind of measure 5 different impact aspects, your interest rate will go down by same 1% each. That means up till 5% your interest rate can go down if you can fulfill 5 criteria. One of the criteria was that your student should be from rural areas. Second, they said affordable private school kind of thing. And they were so simple areas that measurement in 6 monthly or yearly tenure was very easy. So if you are kind of getting into that, we need to find like-minded people, and there are many. But we need to simplify and demystify the complexity of investments. Rather than that, let's see how it can grow in a more steady manner and more, I will say, in a way by which there is a benefit which is coming to the society at large. At the same time, your money is not getting lost. So one of the larger thing in a startup world is out of 10, 2 will succeed, 8 will fail. But in social enterprises, if we try to support in a proper way, and specifically in women entrepreneurs, the failure rates are far, far lower. And that's a very amazing aspect. So why not we support them in a different alternate finance manner? And that failure rates can also diminish far more.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you so much, Anuj. Yes. And this again, when you mentioned about this urban forest, about, alternate financing as well, and about, getting carbon credits or getting blended finance for this. Another question which I often face, because again, we have a shelter home. So I run a shelter home for rescued women of trafficking, and we have 100 women over there. Now, when the entire world is talking about how many lives you have impacted, and even in CSR, we've seen that, everywhere. Investing is all about how many. So our impact is also about how many. So 100 women have been there for the last 20 years. So is my number still 100, or is my number, and the way people say, talk about how many lives you have impacted. So they probably have given some Parle biscuit, which a tiger biscuit of 5 rupees to few million. And that is the lives that they talk about being impacted. And we know that, being in the sector. But these 100 women are not like this. So we are mainstreaming this 100 women for the last 20 years and going through the intense depth of all that needs to be done. So how is this impact being calculated? Should we calculate this impact as 100 into 2 into, 365 into 20? So are those the kind of lives that we talk about being impacted, or it still remains at 100? So, those metrics between the two things has to be similar. It's like simple mathematics, like we get everything into milligrams, and then we convert them into milligrams, and then we look at do the sum, the calculations. Similarly for these as well, I think, this common understanding amongst the world has to be, the ecosystem has to be kind of checked at some point.
There are lots of malpractices in social sector. So I will start with this whole assertion. So that means if you see from the negative side, this aspect kind of drains the precious capital which is available in the sector, and the narratives are tweaked in the manner they want. which is like, so I'm not here to kind of talk about like good or bad about the sector. But the larger thing which we say is we need to have a way by which our narratives can be more stronger. So if you are talking about, let's say, 100 shelter women, so it's not just about one person, it is impacting the life of a family. So can we talk about as a family or a society form, or we talk about individuals? So if I talk about, many of us kind of talk about in India, anything in millions is very, very easy because we are like one of the most populous country in the world. But if you go to, let's say, what is the population of Switzerland? It is just 50 lakh people. What is the population of Singapore? It is 50 lakh. And just if you see in a town like Delhi, or let's say Calcutta or Bombay, just one small suburb will be having 50 lakh plus people. So it doesn't mean that the quantum will be in 100 numbers or thousands or, but if you take this whole approach, like one of the images which I get when I went to Calcutta airport and Mother Teresa's one board is there, it says leadership is not about changing everybody. It is one at a time, change one at a time. So that is most important. So if you are saying that 100 women are there in the shelter home, they are able to sustain themselves after going out of the shelter home. Even if it is 10, it's great. The same thing starts in a social development. When you are early stage, most of us feel, oh, we need to make volumes. But have you got the first 100 loyal customers for you? Have you got even 5 loyal vendors for you? Have you got even 2 loyal employees for you? If you have got, that is the first biggest win. After that, you go to the larger levels. Otherwise, it's all like meaningless. But at the same time, as I said, the importance of peer networks is very important. Storytelling is important. How you kind of find the language which people at large understand. So if I'm sitting in, let's say, in Netherlands, and I'm trying to find a right NGO or a for-profit to invest, obviously I will see a very good website. I will see a very good document which is going to come. I'm not having the time to visit in person. So since they are relying on certain document or some kind of a thing which they can have a visual thing, then you need to either bypass that or otherwise adapt to it. So if I give my own example, I did not have website for the first 10 years of my career when I started this. So it was all word of mouth. So the best way I did is I used to go and meet them in person, whether it was in New York, San Francisco, London, whatever the place, I used to just go and meet. But that was a more long lasting approach. But as I say, many of us may not be able to afford that. Or let's say in COVID time, that is becoming much more complex. So why not we find a peer group where we have much more stronger practitioners coming in, at least give a direction to us. And that can help us in terms of this whole understanding of narratives. And you're doing a fabulous job. Like this whole 100 is a very large number. I will say even 10 will be big.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anuj. Yes, I agree with you. Even like most of my work has also been through word of mouth, and one at a time, word of mouth. And that's we have grown because, again, I always believed in, touch, feel, and, working at the grassroots level and working with people. But it's only now COVID that, yes, our perspectives have changed and it has to change. And yes, we are doing all of those. Now, again, last few questions. I think, Anuj, we could go on forever, but taking just the last few questions. So Rajul Patkar is writing, if one of the co-founder is better in terms of his finance and he is ready to invest some amount every month, what is the best way of getting that money in startup and how one can reward them?
So I would like to, first of all, segregate investment versus the capability to run the company. So let's say you are the CEO of the company and you are the founder. Unless you are not having the capability to run it, scale it, money is of no use. So if one of the co-founder is having money, let the person invest as a loan. That's absolutely fine. Or let them come with a certain other convertible instrument. So you need if you are having more than one person in a startup, you need to start with a question whether you are equal or you are unequal. Just because somebody has money, if they have to be having a lead role, it's as simple as the predatory investor role, as I was telling you. Money does not define a startup success. Let me be very clear to you. We have Snapdeal. It has billions of dollars. They got into it, still they failed. It doesn't allow, even like if you ask me, Flipkart, the founders are nowhere. So money does not justify or kind of prove it that you as a founder will be able to run it. This whole startup related aspect and also the growth related aspect, or attracting clients, attracting loyalty of your team members, or let's say growing this whole confidence of you in terms of investment horizon, narratives, mission driven thing, everything comes from a leader. And that leadership is sometimes is more precious, or I will say every time is more precious than money. Money is a raw material. So just take that as that way. And if you can't structure it, if somebody is becoming overbearing just because of money, then that person is not a co-founder. Let that person come as an investor. That's easier, so that you have a more easy, breathable ground for you to run that company properly.
Agreed. Especially in this forum, when we are talking about impact investing, the entire driving force has to be purpose beyond profit. So the only thing that will drive is whether, there is a purpose and there is a drive, and that, leads. Then money will come as an add-on. So it will just facilitate in your getting to your purpose.
And I may also just, if you allow me to ask, in terms of women entrepreneurs, we also need to have some safe spaces to talk, because there's lots of malpractices which are happening, challenges which happens, which are beyond something which we can discuss just here. So we need to have a kind of a ecosystem where there's some kind of safe spaces to interact and also exchange views. Because let's say if this kind of example is there could be far more challenging examples as well in terms of, and in women entrepreneur specific aspect, this thing increases multifold. So we need to have a very important safe spaces around each other, so that we exchange things properly and get some kind of feedbacks, which can allow you to kind of take a call which is much more commensurate for your interest rather than, and just to also be clear, the enterprise or the startup interest is first, not individual interest. That's why the enterprise building thing again comes into picture.
Excellent, excellent. Before we forget, Aparna has requested for a group photograph. So all of us, if we can come on the screen. I think in the last 4 minutes. But Anuj, this is something which I always ask, that, once we have asked so many questions to you, I think you should also be at liberty to ask us any question. If you have any question, please feel free.
So I'm slightly, because I'm very much active in gender lens investing across different forums. I've been pushing it at my house, outside, and also at different societal things. I think we need a very clear narrative where we talk about I was here because I was talking in women in entrepreneurship. So we should be I will say we should not have a shame in saying, okay, we would like to focus on women entrepreneurs. Let's this whole session be focused on women entrepreneurs, their challenges, their opportunities, and also their own insights. Let men come in, like I'm also talking. So there should be there should be a convergence of men with women, but let's have the agenda more heavy in women overly. And that narrative also changes from a simple thing. Let's say whenever you have your company secretary, and if you have a private limited done, you'll always have a word called chairman. Start from there. Let's start with something. Can we have a word called chairperson embedded in your meetings? So that kind of a gender sensitivity, not just in terms of, I will say, small things, but also in larger thing, needs to change. And as I said, it's a different asset class, and also a very different, safer asset class, if I put it like this. So we need to not just study it or talk about it, but also need to support this whole aspect. And I'm so glad that IIT Bombay has allowed us to have this whole thing, because they also have a very amazing aspect, which I definitely want to highlight to some of the people who may not know. They have a very good, amazing mentor network. And the way they have formulated the mentor network related formula is super amazing. And I'm sure this is something which other institutions or incubators or funders can also get inspiration from, where they are saying, if you are a mentor and you are supporting a startup, there is some kind of a way by which you can balance your time, at the same time have the dignity of the startup maintained as well. So pretty amazing thing to learn. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anuj. Are we ready for the photograph, Aparna?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
I'd like everybody to switch on their cameras. I think this one session by Anuj is more of a trailer than a session that we can simply wind up. I'm sure we will need a lot more. And Anuj, we are going to reach out to you for mentoring and other things also, because many members are interested. So I hope you're up for that.
Absolutely. And ma'am, I also request that we should have some role models. It's always good. Like if Sachin Tendulkar, as a player, started playing cricket, like many like youngsters became cricketer after that because they emulated. So we need to have amazingly great role model women startup entrepreneurs as well around us, who should be the main lead here. And when we see them around, and they will be talking about their challenges and like upsides, downside, and also, as I said, safe spaces, we can have a much better ecosystem coming into them.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Professor Anu, would you like
to? I would like to say a couple of lines. I don't know whether to start with Dr. Mitra or Anuj. I'm going to start with Dr. Mitra, if you don't mind, Anuj. You were wonderful at the questions you asked. It's not easy. I played the role of a fireside conversationalist, but you managed to balance for us simple, useful, much needed questions with deeper and deeper insights. So thank you so much for that. Very nice to hear about your background and the work you do, Dr. Mitra. Anuj, I can read on the chat and all of us are saying thank you for the insightful and knowledgeable conversation. I want to thank you for the simple, straightforward, candid talk that you gave us. I think even right till the end, the flag bearing for gender sensitivity and women's issues, I'm thrilled by, I'm like overawed by. Thank you so much for this conversation between the two of you.
It's a pleasure, ma'am. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Anu. Can't thank you enough, Dr. Aparna Rao, and of course IIT Bombay for bringing us all together. You're brilliant. Anu said that already, but Anuji were brilliant.
Brilliant. You were brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aparna, have you taken the photograph?
Yes, Nishchay, Abhimanyu, can you confirm? I don't think everybody switched on their camera.
Yes, please switch on your camera.
It's okay, as many as we can. Pleasure to have met both of you.
This is the closest we can get into a group photograph right now.
Thank you. Yeah, take care.
Done?
I think so.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anuj. Thank you, everybody,
Thank you, everybody,
for being here patiently on a Saturday morning. And yes, I thoroughly enjoyed this discussion with Anuj, and also, to be with all of you with your insightful questions.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. So Anuj, I will be writing to you again on other
absolutely
sessions and all that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you, everybody. And yes, Anuj, I have already written one introductory mail with Dr. Rajul Patkar.
Okay.
Rajul is on the call, so she will be reaching out to you separately on that.
I'll do that, please. Yeah. Thank you.
And there's a very beautiful thing on the chat, where Jyoti writes, one of the best I've attended, so honest and down to earth. You, thanks a lot from Wise Out Learning. Yes, I think
very humble in that.
Insightful.
Thank you. Take care.